Michael had said today's Torah portion is Tazria Metzora, but he did such a good job of explaining it that I don't think I'm going to go into spots and leprosy and mold anymore. And today I'm going to talk to you instead about moose. Really, I'm going to talk about moose, sorry. So there were three friends once they were all avid hunters, and every year they would go on this hunting trip up to this beautiful isolated lake in Canada to hunt for moose. So they would hire a small pontoon plane to fly them into this lake, which is way, way out in the wilderness. And when the trip was over, the plane would come back and pick them up and bring them home. So the men go on their hunting trip, and 3 days later, the pilot arrives to take them home. So the men, they load up all their gear and their supplies on the plane, and then they strap a moose onto one of the pontoons there. So the pilot says, "Okay, that's it, let's go." But the men say, whoa, we have 2 more moose to load on. The pilot says, whoa, no, that's impossible. The weight is way too much. We'd never be able to take off. So he goes into this big thing about the wind conditions and how much load the plane can take. But the hunters get really, really insistent. They tell the pilot, "Look, we've been doing this trip for years. And every year we do the same thing. Last year, we took off from this same lake with the same kind of aircraft, with the same winds and weather conditions, the same 3 men, the same gear, and 3 moose. The only difference between this year and last year is you, the pilot." So they keep badgering the pilot about it until finally he just relents and he says, "All right, just do it. If you did it last year, I guess we can give it a shot." So he strapped the 2 extra moose onto the pontoons and they get ready for takeoff. So the pilot, he goes to the end of the lake and then he accelerates across the lake as fast as he can make the plane go. And little by little, the overloaded plane, it picks up speed, but the end of the lake it's fast approaching, and at the very last second, they lift off. But by then, it's too late. They hadn't gotten enough speed and enough height and enough acceleration, so the bottom of the pontoons catch the top of the trees, and the plane just goes spinning end over end over end over end, and then the men are thrown from the plane, and there are plane parts everywhere, and the gears everywhere, and mooses everywhere. And a few minutes later, the men come to, and they sit up in the mud, and they look around, and one of them looks around, and he calls out, "Hey, Bill!" And after a moment, he hears, "Joe, where are you? Bill, where are we?" Bill looks around. He goes, "Hey, it looks like we're about 50 feet further than last year." The point is, sometimes change is slow and painful, and it doesn't get you as far as you'd like. But just like the hunters in that story, we can take pride in the steps that we make. Maybe next year, those hunters will clear that tree line. Okay, that was still a joke. I'm telling you that was a real story. I'm telling you this joke because change and forward motion have been on my mind a lot recently. So, it's no secret that our Rabbi is approaching retirement age, and one day he will step down from leadership and leave me and the other leaders of this community with some very large shoes to fill. And I confess I've lost more than one night of sleep, wondering and praying about the direction of this congregation and what it will look like, God willing, 5 or 10 or 15 years from down the line. And I don't know what it will look like. I can only tell you that it will look different. Because 5 and 10 and 15 years ago, Simchat Yisrael looked different than it does today. Change happens. Change is normal, and it's healthy, and it's necessary. We call this the Messianic movement because it's supposed to be moving. It's supposed to be going somewhere, and I don't know exactly where that will be 10 years down the line, but I know it will be 10 years closer to the return of the Messiah. And I want to spend that time doing my best to prepare the way of the Lord, right? But that requires us to move and to grow and to change. And change is scary, right? And it can leave a lot of people upset. Listen, I always found this to be kind of funny. I believe in democracy. I'm not a socialist. I think as far as systems of government go, democracy is as good as we're going to get. And yet, after every presidential election, democracy leaves slightly less than 50% of the population unhappy with the results and the direction of the movement of the nation. When 49% of your population is angry about your direction, you gotta wonder, what are we doing? But change is hard. And that's why it's comforting to know that we are not the first community to struggle with change and new directions. I wanted to get back to my series on the great figures of the Bible, and it just so happens that the next person I want us to study together is someone who struggled with the same things that I do, and who has lost sleep over the same worries that trouble me. And I think we can learn a lot as a community in transition from the lessons in change that God taught this man. So let's open up our Bibles and take a look at the book of Samuel. So Samuel follows this time-honored biblical tradition where the Bible will introduce a character when he's born, and then maybe tell a story or two about his childhood, but they'll skip all the way until he's an adult to tell the rest of his story. So, Moses is like that. We read about him being placed in a basket and found by Pharaoh's daughter, but then we don't hear about him until he's 40 years old. Yeshua is a great example of this. We could build an entire religion about wondering how Yeshua spent his 20s. Alas, these are mysteries, and Samuel follows suit. The book opens with the wonderful story of his mother Hannah, how she prayed for a child and dedicated to the Lord, and we hear about Samuel's miraculous birth. And then it jumps to when he's a young boy serving in the temple, when he first hears the voice of God. He's this little kid, and he has this wonderful relationship, and then he's an old man. So, what do we know about Samuel then? They skip a lot. Well, we know that he is a Nazarite. Those guys with the big Gandalf beards. He's not the first Nazarite that we've met. We've read about how Samson, much like Samuel, was dedicated to the Lord before he was born. But unlike Samson, Samuel really seems to thrive in his role as God's servant. In every encounter we have with Samuel, he's completely on fire to do the Lord's work. He's the perfect Nazarite. And we also know that Samuel was a prophet. Now, Samuel is not the first prophet in the Bible. People like Abraham, and Jacob, and Moses were also prophets. But Samuel was the first of a different kind of prophet. When you think of prophets in the Tanakh, you imagine that the voice crying in the wilderness, calling for Israel to repent and turn back to the Lord. Well, Samuel was that guy. He was the first of the great Old Testament prophets that preached revival and teshuvah. So, Samuel is a Nazarite and a prophet. But what most people forget is that Samuel has a third job title. Does anyone know what his third job was? Well, not quite priest. I think, he what John got right. When Samuel may have been the first of the prophets, he was also the last of the judges. And it's this job, it's his role as the last judge of Israel that I'm really interested in today. Samuel was the last of the judges, because after him, there was a king in Israel. How did Samuel deal with that dramatic transition? How did he process such a huge change? And what can we learn from his story? So, to understand where Samuel is coming from, we need to know where he's been. So, what I want to do is do a quick recap of the last few books of the Bible, just to catch us up. Before I do that, I want to tell you a quick story, right? I always telling people about my time as a staff member of Camp Orlador. So one of my jobs is to plan the outdoor hiking trips. So these are these 3-day-long backpacking trips, usually up in the mountains. So my job is to take a map and field guides and try to plan a trip that everyone will enjoy. The problem is I can usually not get to these places myself, so I'm really reliant just on the maps and the guidebooks. But I want to make it so everyone can enjoy it. So one year I started planning this trip, and I'm getting really excited. We're going to go up this mountain, and then across this ridge line, and then we'll pass through this lake and go down this valley and forest. It's going to be so beautiful and so much fun, and I'm all pumped up for this. But then the day finally comes. We get to the trail, we find the route I planned. And it starts at the foot of this mountain, and we climb to the top of the mountain, and it's awesome. We get to the top and we feel so good about ourselves. Those bags were heavy, but our muscles are hurting, and it feels good. And wait, it's not done. There's another mountain to climb. So then we climb up a second mountain, and we get to the top of that one. There's a third mountain we have to climb, and we're dying with this one. There were 5 mountains in that one day. It didn't look that bad on the map, but it was. So by the end of the day, it was just too much. It was a beautiful hike. It really, really was. But the mountains were too high. The bags were too heavy. The rivers we were crossing were too wide to wade through. The sun was beautiful, but it was like 98 degrees out there. And the sun was beautiful, but it was bright and too hot. And by the end of the first day, we were just exhausted. And we had 2 more days just like it to go. So the wonderful, beautiful trip I planned, it was still a great trip. The problem was we weren't strong enough to do it. It was a trip for experienced, grizzled trailblazers, not a bunch of out-of-shape teenagers. So the new way, so what I decided to do was, we pulled out the maps, and we found a new way to go. We saw that there wasn't just this one path we could take. There was a lower path through the valley that we could take that would get us to our destination. And the new way wasn't as beautiful. It didn't pass through so many mountains and rivers, but it was a path that we could do, that we could handle, and it got us to our destination in the end, and we wound up having a pretty good time. So I want you to keep the story in mind as we look at the story of Israel up to this point. So as Torah comes to a close, Moses is nearing the end of his life, and his brother Aaron and his sister Miriam have already passed on. And with his death, the last of that generation of leaders will be gone. But before he dies, Moses passes his torch on to his disciple Joshua. And Joshua becomes leader of the Jewish people. And Joshua carries that torch and spends the rest of his life leading Israel in their long conquest of the land of Canaan. And over the decades, Israel takes the land that God promises them, and the tribes settle into their promised homelands. And at the end of the book of Joshua, he's an old man about to die and join Moses. So he calls the nation of Israel together, and he delivers his address to them. And before he dies, who does Joshua pass his torch on to? No one. No one. God and Joshua do the unthinkable. When Joshua dies, there is no person to lead Israel, or at least no one person. It seems strange, but this was God's plan all along. God was looking at his maps and his field guides, and he was planning this wonderful trip for his people to take. So throughout Torah, God is working to set up a society that rejects traditional leadership. The Torah is an extended critique against the institutions of power that have characterized humankind since the dawn of civilization. The whole book of Exodus is all about God overcoming the most powerful empire in the world to set his people free from the rule of kings and tyrants. So God did not intend to bring his people into the land only to enslave them to another king. So when Joshua dies, he tells the children of Israel, I have given you my Torah. In it you will find everything you need to know about how to govern yourself. Act with justice. Show mercy to the poor and the widow. Treat your neighbor as yourself and value life and goodness above power and wealth. If you love me with all your hearts, then I will be your king and your protector and your provider. You will live in peace and prosperity in the land that I have given you and never need to serve another master again. God has planned this wonderful trip for his people, a trip that will lead them through beautiful mountains and across lovely rivers. But the people just aren't strong enough to make the trip. And the book of Judges tells us that Israel began intermingling with the Canaanites and soon turned away from God. The wonderful trip that God had planned for them was ruined. Their own weakness made them unable to enjoy the beauty. But God doesn't just give up. He pulls out his maps and he finds another way to get his people to their destination. See, God never wanted Israel to need a king, but away from the beautiful, safe road that God prepared for them, the Israelites were vulnerable, and soon they were attacked and robbed and enslaved by their enemies. So God changes the plan and raises up a leader, a judge, to unite the children of Israel and protect them in times of crisis. So it's important to remember that the judges weren't kings. A king establishes a dynasty and has his sons rule after him. The judges' leadership only extended to their lifetimes. They were expressly not allowed to pass their torches on themselves. They had to pass the torch back to God. They didn't get to choose their successor. In fact, when they died, Israel was leaderless for a time until God raised up a new judge. So, going back to the hiking trip metaphor, this is God's new plan. The original plan was wonderful, but it just didn't work out. There was nothing wrong with the plan. The problem was with the people. But God doesn't abandon his people. He finds a road that they can take. But the problem is, this new plan isn't working out either. See, over the centuries, the judgeship is slowly failing. The first judge of Israel brought peace to the land for 80 years. And after him, the judges kept peace for 40 years, a whole generation. But after Gideon, each successive judge was worse than the last. The judges become cruel and foolish and disobedient to God. Each judge keeps the peace in Israel for a shorter time than his predecessor, with many of them only being able to hold Israel together for a few years at a time. The line of judges in the book of Shoftim ends with the reign of Samson, who was probably the worst judge of them all, and he caused as much trouble as he fixed. And the book ends with a couple of terrible and depressing and violent stories that demonstrate the terrible state that Israel was in. And so we come to the book of Samuel. We see that the judgeship is still in a terrible place. After Samson's death, we read that the judgeship in Israel has been passed to the priest Eli. Well, Eli himself wasn't a bad judge. We find out that he had committed the cardinal sin of judges. In his old age, he had passed the judgeship on to his two corrupt sons, who were using their position of power to take bribes and to commit adultery. And the judgeship had been completely corrupted to the point that God himself had to strike this family down so that he could restore order to Israel. So at last, the worn down and battered torch of leadership passes on to Samuel. But Samuel is different. See, he's not like Eli or Samson or even Gideon. He is a Nazarite, completely dedicated to God since before his birth. He is a prophet. He has been proclaiming the word of the Lord since he was a young boy, and not once has God ever let his words fall to the ground. And now, he is a judge. And he intends to be the best judge that Israel has ever had. He's going to reverse the downward trend that has plagued the judgeship for generations. He is going to lead Israel back to the original path that God had planned for them. So Samuel goes about his judgeship with impeccable integrity. So Samuel is just staunchly against the idea of Israel having a king. So what he does as a judge is he establishes a circuit. We read in chapter 7 that Samuel would travel from city to city, judging in each place. And he wasn't doing this as he enjoyed the walk. He traveled because he didn't want people to come to him as if he were a king holding court. He went to them instead. And for all the years that he judged, he acted the opposite of Eli's sons. He never stole or accepted a bribe or took advantage of anyone. He acted justly and restored the trust of the people. So, happy ending, right? Samuel restores the judgeship and steers Israel back on track, right? And then they have a happy ending ever after. Well, maybe that would have worked if Samuel had lived forever, but even great judges get old. And so when chapter 8 begins, we read that something shocking. Samuel, who had once done everything right his whole life, had committed the same cardinal sin that Eli did before him. It says when Samuel grew old, he appointed his sons as judges over Israel. His sons, however, did not walk in his ways, but turned aside from him after dishonest gain, and they took bribes and perverted justice. You're not allowed to pass that torch on yourself. He tried to do it himself. He tried to take the torch that belonged to God and give it to his own children, even though they were unworthy. So despite all the hard work he had done all his life, history was repeating itself. The judgeship that Samuel had tried so hard to fix was still corrupted and no longer a viable path for Israel to take. And for generations, God had led Israel on this new path. And for periods of time, it worked. There are some great moments in the history of the judgeship. But the route wasn't working anymore. The mountains were too high again. Rivers were too wide, the sun too hot. There was too much temptation for corruption and nepotism. And if a man as great as Samuel could fall, then what chance did anyone else have? The time had come for God to pull out the maps again and find a new route for Israel to take. So the elders of Israel come to Samuel and they tell him, behold, you have grown old and your sons do not walk in your ways. Now, appoint for us a king to judge us. like all the nations. Now, it's a pretty reasonable request. I know it's bad, but the Torah does allow for kings. If you go back to this book of Numbers, it actually details how to appoint a king and what to expect from a king. So this was always part of God's plan in the end. I don't know if it was God's plan for right this moment, but God had prepared this contingency. And it's a reasonable request. They're tired, the path's gotten too difficult, and they want Samuel's help in finding a new way to reach their destination. But how does Samuel react? Not quite good. He's heartbroken, and he's deeply hurt. He feels rejected and unappreciated, and why not? Samuel, he goes before the elders of Israel, and he rails on them. He rebukes them for asking for a king, and he warns them of all the dangers of trying to be like the other nations. He tells them, you're going to regret this decision, that you're being disobedient. He actually even calls down like a thunderstorm. It's pretty cool. He's so mad. He's like, God, send down lightning to show them. And like a big thunderstorm breaks out, and everyone gets really scared. Samuel, we know exactly how Samuel feels about all this. But how does God react to the people's request and to Samuel's anger? God's response is much more calm and reasoned. He tells Samuel, listen to the voice of the people in all that they say to you. Because Samuel, they have not rejected you, rather they have rejected me from being king over them. So now listen to their voice. Earnestly forewarn them, declare them the rulings of the king who will reign over them. Tell them what's to come. But listen to them. See, God isn't happy about this turn of events, but he doesn't sound particularly surprised either. We've seen God when he's angry. Think back to the golden calf incident. God's not angry here. He's disappointed. But he's already got the maps out, and he's planning a new route. God isn't going to give up on his people. He's going to find a new way to get them to their destination. But Samuel is suffering here. He can't understand what went wrong. So God reassures Samuel. Samuel, I know you're hurting. I know it seems like you've been rejected, like all your work has been for nothing. But I promise you that you have been a great leader. You have led faithfully, and you have built something wonderful, and have made a difference in the lives of so many people. But now, it's time to change. And we need to go on a new path now. We need to move forward together, because I will never leave my people behind. The new path may not be as beautiful as the one I wanted to take. But Samuel, I promise you, I will get us to our destination together. I am ready to replan. Can you trust me? And in the end, even though it's hard, Samuel can accept change and trust that God has a plan. And I think there are some valuable lessons we can learn from this episode in Jewish history. We've learned that God never leaves his people behind. I learned that a good cabin trip leader can plan an awesome trip, but a great leader will prepare 3 of them, just in case the first 2 don't work out. The important thing is to make sure that everyone in the group makes it to the end. God never gives up on his people. He has a plan for them, but if they aren't strong enough to follow, he will recalculate, replan, and rebuild until he finds a way to get us there. Even if it means sending out his own son to die for our sins in our place, God will find a way to save us. And as our community grows and changes and transforms over the coming years, I want to remember this lesson especially. This community wasn't built by just one or a couple people. It took all of us to get here, and I need all of you to get where we're going. And I don't want to leave anyone behind. Wherever we are going, with God's help, I intend for us to get there together. That leads us to the second lesson we can learn from Samuel. We have to learn to trust the directions that God is calling us in. When God told Samuel to anoint a king over Israel, Samuel was angry and hurt and afraid. He felt that it was absolutely the wrong thing to do, that this direction would lead Israel to ruin and destruction. But God already had a plan in place. God was ready to work through the kings of Israel. He was ready to bless the world through the kings. God used Saul to defeat the Philistines and bring peace to the land. God used Solomon to build his temple and to make Israel in the name of Adonai great through the world. God used Hezekiah to bring about revival in Israel in the golden age of Judaism. And God uses the line of David A king that Samuel would never have chosen to crown, to bring about the greatest thing this world has ever known in our Messiah Yeshua. We have to listen to the voice of God and trust Him to bring us in new directions. Samuel tried to steer Israel himself, but it's always God who's in control. Congregation, this last year, I'll be honest with you, it's been the most trying and the most amazing year of my life. I have never heard the voice of God more clearly than I have in this last year. I have witnessed miracles that I never would have believed. I have felt the Ruach HaKodesh move so powerfully in my life and in this very room. I mean, just yesterday I talked to Mary Moeller. Remember I told you a few months ago about how she was prayed over here and this weight lifted from her chest? She went to her cardiologist recently, and the cardiologist said that all the disease is gone. Something is happening. I don't know what. I don't understand the directions that God's calling me, but I know I have to follow Him. Amen. And I know that whatever path He takes us by, God will get us to our destination. The destination, sometimes the destination is more important than the path we take to get there. Messianic Judaism has a special destination in this world. Simchat Yisrael has a special destination in this world. In a few weeks, we're going to be welcoming Rabbi Russ wrestling for our synagogue, and I think he articulated our destination better than I ever could, so I'm going to read a quote from Rabbi Russ. Messianic Judaism is springing up at a grassroots level all over the world as the Holy Spirit moves upon Jewish believers. It is a movement not begun by only one or a few individuals, but one that has spontaneously sprung up all over the world. It is a unique movement with no similar parallels in world history. The Messianic Jewish movement is the people called by God and rededicating themselves to the proclamation of the good news that Yeshua the Messiah is the Redeemer of the Jewish people as well as for all of the nations. This is our destination. And we need to keep our eyes on it and know that while we may not know the way, God will get us there. Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom.